we have all seen, or at the very least are familiar with, Disney's The Lion King. As dark as some aspects of the film are, the reality is that The Lion King is rather vanilla in light of one distinct tribe of lions who over time were coined the title the Mapogos. In the world of lions, a pride refers to a group of females namely, whereas a coalition refers to a group of males. Although the Mapogo lions came to be known for their greatness and expansive territories under their stern reign, like many, branched out from humble origins. Their tale began in the heart of the Sabi Sands Reserve in the northeastern region of South Africa. Born into the Sparta pride were 10 cubs, 5 of which were male. Now anyone who knows the Mapogos and their legend knows that their coalition was comprised of 6 males. You may be wondering, if there were 5 males, where is the 6th member? His time to shine comes a little later into the story. From the beginning throughout their cub lives, it was clear that the cubs were destined for something special. One clear example of this was on one fateful day, 5 of the 10 cubs tragically lost their lives during a buffalo hunt. The 5 who remained and narrowly missed a similar unfortunate fate were none other than the Mapogos. It was not until 2003 when the 6th member would join the pride. It is not reliably known where exactly his origins were, but at about 4 years senior to the cubs, a new male came into the picture. That male was none other than Makulu. Usually when a new male is introduced, it is a rather unpredictable and vulnerable time for both, those being intruded upon and the intruder himself. It can go either way, with an air of welcoming and acceptance, or with a blood battle and usually annihilation of the cubs, as a new male typically sees no purpose in rearing the cubs of a latter male. Typically, they prefer to start fresh. This, however, was not the case. I guess you could call it another lucky draw in the cards of the Mapogos, because this new male did not in fact pose a threat, and nor was he threatened. They took on to each other equally well, and to biologists' surprise, Makulu joined the elite forces of the Mapogos. As the cubs grew with the passage of time and reached their sexual peak, they were exiled by their fathers to lead prides and hone territories of their own. Once again, to biologists' surprise, instead of going their separate ways, the Mapogos remained alongside one another and instead formed their own coalition. This is the point where they came to be referred to as the Mapogo Coalition, a Swazi term that translates to security or jury and teamwork. Ironically, the coalition came to fit their title rather well. Considering that the Mapogo Coalition was compiled of 6 members, this was a distinguishing factor from the very start. Typically, coalitions are not so large in number, but this distinct factor may have been the extraordinary advantage that aided them in conquering so much territory with time. However, having been freshly exiled by their forefathers, it would take some time for the Mapogos to hone the necessary skills they would need to do so. For starters, they needed to perfect their hunting skills. Originally, they had to adapt more of an opportunist type of feeding behavior by eating the leftover carcasses of prey hunted by other lions. However, with time, they were able to master the art of capturing and hunting down buffalo, hippo, rhinoceroses, and even a tricky prey, giraffe. The Mapogos' superb hunting mastery, as well as their continued sexual maturation, where their manes began to be more pronounced, greatly contributed to a newfound growing confidence. Some may even go to the extent of saying their confidence was laced with an air of cockiness, because what would happen next stunned many biologists. As the Mapogos began to enter different male lions' territories, they began to enter rather dramatically and obnoxiously. Instead of quietly coming through without intentionally causing much disturbance or ruckus, they started an uproar wherever they set their paws forward, by roaring, scent marking, and challenging opponent lions. It is safe to say they caused quite the disturbance. Instead of waiting for a challenge, they went to the challenge. This type of behavior led to both negative and positive consequences. The positive mainly being that they were able to conquer so much territory and prides, and the negative being that they were attributed to a dramatic fall in the lion population. The rampage did not exclusively apply to male lions. Rather, lionesses and cubs were slaughtered in the process, and viciously so. Victims' limbs were torn apart. The cannibalistic behaviour was one characteristic that attributed a tremendous shock value to the onlooking observers and biologists, because this was not something commonly exhibited. Whether the cannibalism was to make a statement or to truly prey upon is unclear. One pride that particularly suffered at the paws of the Mapogos was the Ottawa Pride, which was comprised of 3 females and their fellow cubs. The cubs were annihilated and eaten, and in turn, the Mapogos proceeded to attempt to mate within the pride as a means to continue on their own bloodline. The mating caused some uproar and controversy within the coalition itself, which actually resulted in one of the lionesses being a casualty as a product of those differences. But for the lionesses that did survive from the Ottawa Pride, they served to continue the bloodline of the Mapogos. Fast forwarding through time, the Mapogos conquered the majority of the Sabi Sands through their aggressive methodologies. One can say they reigned with iron paws. Members of the Mapogo Lion Coalition and their dominance. When we hear of the Mapogos, we usually hear of them as a unifying force rather than them individually as lions. So, who were the 6 special warrior lions that made up the Mapogos exactly? There was Makulu, Pretty Boy, Rasta, Scar, Mr. T, and Kinky Tail. Makulu. Makulu was the oldest and largest lion of the coalition. He had a dark-coloured mane, which is a product of higher testosterone levels, which most definitely aided in ascertaining his dominance, as he was the dominant male of the group for the majority of the coalition's reign. When it came to cubs, Makulu was observed to be the most patient of the group. He was also the most solitary amongst the other lions. Whereas the other members tended to be socially interlinked with their fellow brothers more frequently, Makulu was seen to be away from his coalition and pride for days at a time, patrolling the territory. Having to patrol such a vast region probably attributed greatly to that solo behaviour as well. Amongst the other lions, Makulu was the expert when it came to patrolling and took on that role with pride and precision. Pretty Boy. As his name suggests, Pretty Boy was indeed a pretty boy. Having a wind-swept and full mane attributed greatly to producing a handsome appearance that many onlookers certainly noted and admired. Scar. Once again, as his name suggests, Scar was named after 2 scars that were noticed, one on his spine and the other on his left hind hip. Rasta. Rasta was named after some matted areas in his mane that made some strands appear like dreadlocks. For this reason, he was interchangeably referred to as Rasta and Dreadlocks. Mr. T. Over time, Mr. T actually began to be nicknamed as Satan because of some questionable behaviours that he illustrated. Mainly the cannibalization of his brother's cubs, which in human terms would essentially be his nieces and nephews. That itself is very telling of who Mr. T was as a lion. Out of all the other lions, Mr. T stood out as the most aggressive and vicious in nature. He was an excellent hunter, a challenger, and rarely let go of an opportunity to get his paws dirty. One could also say that he was bloodthirsty and power-hungry, whereas the other lions were fairly content with Makulu as their dominant leader. Mr. T challenged Makulu for dominance on several occasions. It was not until Makulu had gotten older that Mr. T was actually successful in attaining that long sought-after dominance. As far as appearance goes, Mr. T was characterized by a mohawk-looking mane, not quite as full and handsome as his fellow coalition counterparts. But what he lacked in appearance, he most certainly made up for with his iron paws. Kinky Tail. Kinky Tail was named after a kink at the rear end of his tail. Kinky Tail was similar to Mr. T in the sense that he was aggressive, willing to get his paws dirty, and up for any challenge, which is not very surprising considering that Kinky Tail was essentially the wingman of Mr. T. Kinkytail and Mr. T were inseparable and exhibited such a strong and loyal brotherly bond with one another. Where one went, the other most certainly followed. I guess this goes to show that even the most iron of iron paws have a soft filling within. What happened to the Mapogo Lion Coalition? As great as the Mapogo Lions were, it is also true, as with any other reign, each kingdom has its downfall. The same was true for the Mapogos. Although their legacy does live on today through the bloodline they successfully passed down through the Ottawa Pride. What led to the downfall of the coalition and their command over such vast regions comes down to a couple of culprits. Firstly, it started with a divide from within. After a spat between Mr. T and Makulu, Mr. T left with Kinkytail, to which they formed a coalition of their own, just the two of them. This was something unique to biologists, the fact that a coalition had divided into two coalitions. This left Mr. T and Kinkytail to claim the eastern regions of the Sabi Sands Reserve, while Makulu reigned over the west with the other members of the coalition. For a while, Mr. T and Kinkytail were as successful as they ever were with challenging intruders and holding onto their territory. However, that strong reign was threatened with the intrusion of a new coalition of 5 young males known as the Majingalanes. Initially, Kinkytail and Mr. T were successful in making the Majingalanes coalition short of one member by brutally attacking one of the members, causing the lion to lose its life. However, the Majingalanes were not fazed. Instead, they were set on avenging the loss of their brother and were successful in cornering Kinkytail one night while he was patrolling during one of the few instances he was alone. The saying, "What goes around comes around," seems to ring hauntingly true in this case. Just as Kinkytail was responsible for taking many lives and doing this gruesomely, Kinkytail was just as gruesomely attacked to his very last breath by the 4 Majingalanes. Unfortunately for Mr. T, he was too late to save his brother, but that didn't stop him from attempting to do so, although his efforts proved to be futile. Seeing as he no longer had his wingman, Mr. T decided to track down his long-lost fellow Mapogo brethren. He successfully encountered them, still strongly ruling and thriving over the western region of the Sabi Sands with prides of their own. Makulu was initially skeptical about welcoming Mr. T back, and perhaps for good reason, for what would end up spiralling with his cubs at the paws of Mr. T. However, the remaining Mapogos, Pretty Boy, Rasta and Scar, readily welcomed back their long-lost brother. After having annihilated the cubs of the Pride, Mr. T was able to weasel his way up to establishing dominance over the Pride and coalition. However, that was short-lived because in 2012, yet another coalition of 5, the Salati Coalition, intruded and were successful in decimating Mr. T. Just as Kinkytail had suffered such a savage end, Mr. T was destined for a similar fate. The two brothers that had once been so inseparable lost their lives due to products of the ferocious lifestyles they had so passionately upheld. The Mapogos' power steadily dwindled thereafter. It is unclear what became of the remaining Mapogos, to be exact. It is predicted that Pretty Boy and Rasta were also attacked by the Majingalanes after never successfully returning from a patrol. Makulu and Scar ended up being the most long-lived individuals of the coalition and opted for retreating from the Sabi Sands Reserve entirely after the switch of power from the Mapogos to the Salati Coalition. As invincible as the Mapogos once were, an inevitable close of an era was bound to happen at one point or another. They attacked and protected until their lives ended. With that, the magnificent Mapogo coalition drifted away into a mysterious, hoary sunset where a sun would never rise upon them again. But what do you make of the Mapogo lion tribe? Be sure to let us know your thoughts in the comment section below and help us by growing this community while working to solve these unexplained mysteries. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more videos.